I'm Daniel, work with education and outreach at CEMUS.
I'm Johan Margulis. Have a master in politics and a BA in economics, and I'm interested in CEMUS work and, of course, sustainability issues in finance.
I'm Lillian, and I work at CEMUS with the MSD courses, and I'm an MSD student.
And I'm Derek, Whitman last names. And I also am a graduate of the MSD program, and I'm working at CEMUS as a master's course coordinator.
And I'm Ash. I work for CEMUS running the climate change leadership course, and I'm in COP26 in Glasgow.
Yep. But I thought I'd do the 30-second introduction are a bit different. So this is our last live lunch report, our last day of recording or having this live stream in CEMUS Library. And the COP ends, or the negotiations ends tomorrow, maybe they're saying, or tomorrow night or into Sunday morning. But I mean, the work with these issues and everything around sustainability and all the things that CEMUS focuses on, that is going to continue for the rest of our lives, our children's lives, probably, and their children. So this is in the long game of things. But I think also what we've one of the things that we've reached as a conclusion maybe over these 3 weeks is that we'll try also to focus on the things that we can influence here at CEMUS and try to do that kind of summary, but also see concrete things that we can do different in education and outreach, or inspiring things or ideas that we can utilize in our courses when you come back as well, Ash. So try to make these enormous issues and questions kind of more tangible and more relatable and more workable in a sense. So that is my starting point, and I think also looking at history, this is not the first time in history there's been global problems or issues or challenges that people have had to dealt with, so there's other people before us that have managed to get through these kind of processes and live decent lives and good lives as well. But Ash, just should we do like my kind of roundup of the things you've taken part in, but also then trying to tie all of this together? And we haven't discussed much about the negotiations, because that's not been much in the news. But and then maybe we can relate to some of these videos as well, or maybe wrap up with one of them. But please go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a general talk of COP being a failure, as I think there is after most COPs. And yesterday I went to an event with Pacific Islanders, and it was incredibly emotional. So this guy was saying for every one Pacific Islander there in the negotiating room, there were 12 fossil fuel lobbyists. And he was saying that to call this a failure kind of ignores all the hard work these people have put in, and basically putting across the point, which everyone walks out and on the streets and says COP is a failure and systems like this don't change. But there are hundreds of people from the Pacific Isles, from the global south, from Asia, from the most affected communities that are sitting in those negotiating rooms. Like, they know they're almost fighting a losing battle. They know that it's such an uphill struggle to get justice. So I think that seeing him speak and the emotion of these people, it was really difficult. And I think then to call it a failure kind of undermines the hard work that these people have done, that it hasn't taken us far enough. But there are people in those negotiating rooms that are absolutely working themselves to the ground and trying their best to fight for justice. And I think that that's maybe a perspective that isn't looked at enough. When people say, oh, the negotiations were a failure, it's like, I mean, on the whole, we haven't got out of it what we wanted. But it's not like everyone in those negotiating rooms is on the side of bad, and that really stood out to me. And I was also part of, so there was a march through COP towards the negotiating rooms from the Pacific Islanders where they had flags, and this is the first time within the UNFCCC that they've permitted a protest within the venue that involves national flags. And I think that was very, very important to the Pacific Islanders to have their flags flown here, and that they are really fighting for everything they can because they're already being affected. And that was a really interesting perspective, and very emotional as well, I think. And that's the things that have stood out to me here, is people speaking from their heart and speaking their truth. So just before I joined in with you now. There was like Indigenous peoples on the stage. It's the People's Summit, which is normally is outside of COP and has been, but today have one sort of session in the big plenary room this morning, and the crowd is it's like a concert. Like, the crowd is so involved, people are so passionate, and I think that, you know, while certain aspects of COP are going to be called failures, the thing as a whole hasn't failed. There is so much energy, there is so much passion, there are people not getting to the end point, not getting to where they should be, but they're getting there, and their voice is getting across, not as much as it should be. And I guess it's, should we or not accept, or be happy with the incrementalism, or angry at the we're not all the way there? And I think it's important to see both. You can't see it as binary, as sort of good or bad. We've made progress, we've still got so much more to go, but it wasn't a waste of time, I think is an important way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think also the expectations. I mean, if we would translate this and look at a CMS course, for example, if at the end of a CMS course, not all students and course coordinators solve every problem that the course dealt with, and had like a detailed plan of how to start this and do this step by step, and also among themselves agree on these kind of solutions, that kind of expectation on a CMS or just a general a university course would be really strange. So I think it is, and it's also with these kind of huge meetings that COP are, and all the people coming there, and all of the people interacting with each other, and actually being able to meet in person, bringing those things home, and trying to maybe changing little bits of how you work or how you focus your research or whatever you do. That is immensely important, but almost impossible to see or measure or weigh into anything.
I think for me, it's like seeing COP26. It's hearing from Daniel and from you, Ash, and others, also my own readings. It's if I see it as like an output result, then it's like, then maybe it's more, okay, it's not a complete success, but if one sees it as an initiative and a process as well, because what you said is like, it can be critical against some of the the outputs, but it has actually opened up to pick up different kind of topics that is like, one can argue, say it was discussed in COP26, and it's like they wanted to develop, and then one can pick it up locally, regional, national, international, and to work on these issues. I think then it's maybe more of a success, because it has, I think, a lot of potentials. It's like, for me, especially focusing on the finance of it, it's like it has such enormous potential. What will happen? It depends on what we do with it.
Yeah, and I think as well with that it's about kind of the systems of the COP, and that, you know, we've had 25, this is 26, and it hasn't managed to curb emissions. The plans that people have made, the agreements that have come out of it, haven't managed to curb emissions. But we've continued to do it, and I think that there needs to be, I mean, again, that setting up this kind of political process would be incredibly difficult, but something to scrutinize the UN, like a proper independent body. I mean, like looking at the amount of fossil fuel lobbyists that are here, there needs to be an independent inquiry into how that has happened, why that has happened, what's going to happen to make sure that can never happen again. And I think because maybe COP or that the UN is seen as the ultimate transnational body, that there isn't anything there to scrutinize that when there needs to be. And or the scrutiny has to come from, like, it's coming from the marginalized people. It's coming from the global south, from women, from indigenous groups, and we need to either find a way to elevate them to a position of power over the UN, so that the scrutiny can actually hold up. Because I think it's part of the problem with particular youth protests, for example, that they're not wrong, but they don't have the power and the authority to get that change. And I think that's a whole struggle with this system. And I guess, like you say, you have to frame what is success for this, what would be classed as a successful COP, and within the system that COP is, being realistic, like, you're not going to get political success on a global scale. That's not what COP, I mean, it's what COP is for, but it's not. COP's never going to achieve that. Like, it can't work in that way. I think it maybe reassessing the expectations and really defining what is a successful COP is a useful way to think about what productive things have come out of this.
Yeah, and I think another parallel, and this is a perfect bridge for you, Isak, as well. You get to introduce yourself, but I think also the European Union and that collaboration after the Second World War, you can say there's so many ways that the European Union are failing. But if you look at the basic kind of starting point, preventing a war between Germany and France, again, that goal was achieved as it is now, and it seems very unlikely that a war between Germany and France would ever happen within the next 100 years or 200 years. So there's also the definition and what kind of goals you set as a success or not, without being defeatist as well. But it's like, I invited you, especially here, you get to introduce yourself very briefly, around this article, you and like 50 to 100 people. There's a lot of people involved in that article, but that article was basically, and you know it much better, but why we haven't succeeded in reducing emissions. Is that kind of fair? One sentence. But then also, if that article could be then translated into how can we then succeed or do better around this as well.
Yeah.
But if you just want to state your name and where you're situated.
Sure. Situated right here in CEMUS Library. Good to see you, Ash. Nice
Good to see you. Thanks for coming along.
I know most of you, but I know seen you before. Who we met?
Yeah, I'm Lillian. I'm working with the MSD program.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm Johan. I'm an outsider, but I like CEMUS.
Yeah, outsiders are.
Yeah,
that's what we like.
Politics and economics.
Outsiders are inside.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Isak, and I've been working here at CEMUS in and out studying since 2005, so in many different capacities. At the moment, I'm a PhD student or a PhD candidate here at the department, and we, as Daniel has said, one of the articles that I've been working on over the last year looks at the last 30 years of negotiations, the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 decades of research related to climate change, and the plethora of action that's been taken or that's been spoken about for the last 30 years. And then, as Ash was saying, I mean, we've had emissions that just backwards. If you look at the last 30 years, we've been more fossil carbon than there's something obviously that we're not doing right. So that's sort of the starting point of this article. And then it was actually a request from the IPCC to begin with. That's maybe a bit of an important background. It was the lead authors of the upcoming third working group report, which is focusing on mitigation. And she knew that my colleague Kevin Anderson, who's here also, is an outspoken critic of the third working group, and also sees that one of the main reasons perhaps we haven't curbed emissions is part of how we produce knowledge. So that also the article tries to not only explore the sort of vested interest and the power dynamics that play out there, but also think about how that plays out in sort of research that's conducted around this question. So and we realized quite quickly that we couldn't answer this question ourselves. Even though there's been a lot of things written, we have not read it, and we have a very particular perspective on these things. So we invited, I think, we started inviting other people, and to specifically, based on their experience and their understanding of research within their fields. So everything from economics and finance to questions of psychology or history, etc., to sort of give their sort of short, almost elevator pitch in terms of what's based on the literature and their readings and their understandings of the issue, what is sort of has inhibited more meaningful action. And I wouldn't say that we come to any. It's not an attempt to sort of find the 10 reasons why we failed, even though that's kind of how it could be interpreted. And not either a list of 10 things we should do. So it's kind of also going away from this kind of action list mentality and saying that these issues are much more they're much more ingrained into our societies and into our sort of way of thinking, then makes that possible. But one of the things we try to do in the article is bring up perspectives that we think have been underrepresented or perhaps not given the voice or the power that they should have in both public debates on climate, but also in the more academic settings that many of us have been working in for some time. So, and there, I would say, to answer your question, I think one of the things that kind of comes out of this analysis, not surprisingly, from all these different perspectives that we take, is the sort of central role of power, and how that's been sort of key. And I think that's, I didn't listen to the beginning of this, Ash, unfortunately, but listening to you yesterday and a few other things, that I mean, this is obviously quite apparent, I guess, also at the COP as it plays out. But of course, there's also other forms of power that are not visible at the COP that are also at play. I think one of the things that we address, for example, just to take one example, is the sort of geopolitical dimension of not being able to bring down emissions, and sort of the energy politics and the sort of the geopolitics and the militarism that is sustained not only in their practices and their sort of and in the sort of material sense, but also in the sort of more the ideas and the sort of views on humans and views on society that are present within these kind of contexts where this kind of raw power is executed, also within finance, I would say, also, which we talked about here. But then also, I think in terms of what we could do then differently, I guess, because one thing I've realized with this article is that we focus a lot on power in all its different forms, but there's also a risk that you by having such a critique that you actually strengthen. So this kind of reflects a thing that you actually strengthen that which you point out as a problem. And we don't write about this so much in the paper, but I think that's where I'm at now, is a little bit. I hopefully the article is a meaningful sort of contribution to thinking differently, although I'm not thinking that's going to have a huge splash and affect anything in general. But I think the process of us 23 authors writing this together, all of us having quite a critical stance towards these sort of issues that is maybe not the dominant perspective within our various disciplines, has still sort of solidified and concretized some things that I think are really important to sort of highlight. And then I think that hopefully will help, you know, others and ourselves also to think differently. Because I think one of the main issues, I think, with the article, actually, not to be self-critical, is that we focus just on emissions. And we look at carbon, and we look at how carbon, and we have a graph in the beginning showing the inequity in terms of where it comes from and so forth. But it's still, that's the main framing. And the question is, why haven't we bent the global emissions curve? And then we go on to critique the narrative of control, which is sort of embedded in the title. So I think there are some contradictions in our article, but I think that's also maybe helpful to sort of show that also that these issues aren't sort of easy. And I think in terms of where change will come from, it will be probably really unexpected, is I guess the only thing I would say. So to allow that sort of those unexpected things to happen would be maybe one thing that is a message also, not so much to the people on the streets and the people sort of criticizing, you know, the negotiations, but actually people that are within positions of power. And there I would include scientists and researchers very much in that as well, to allow things to happen that maybe are outside of their realm of expertise or what they can imagine even. So I guess that would be a key thing there.
But very briefly, I mean, we're going to let you in as well, Ash, but I think the geopolitical thing, and that's also been part of like CEMUS courses and the discussion around energy and climate before. But I think also if you look at it, if you would take on a role, and being a world leader and trying to figure out this game, you have so many things on your list. And also the aspect of a war, whether it's a war with China, a war with Russia, from a Western kind of perspective, everything that you do that kind of weakens your own position or weakens your capacity to basically defend yourself in a sense, that becomes something you're not going to do. And I think that kind of basic, both psychological, but just common sense kind of position and starting point makes it very hard to take on emission reductions that you kind of see as a world leader, weakening your own economy, and weakening your own economy creates troubles for all sorts of things, but it also puts you in a weaker position when it comes to geopolitical power and power balance in the world. But that's not a given that it has to be that way, but I think that is part of the thinking and part of the thing that is not so much part of the discussion.
Exactly.
Because in CEMUS Twitter feed, one little thing appeared that wasn't COP, and the algorithms are as they are, but it was like U.S. warning of like a buildup along the Ukrainian border.
Yeah, I saw that as well.
So they're warning from a perspective of a Russian invasion in Ukraine. So there is all of these other things, and then COVID, of course, and other things that are appearing. We talked so much, so we lost you, Ash. I think it is his Wi-Fi or internet connection as well. Yeah, just listening to us and then checking out. Yeah. But are there other comments here since we're waiting for reconnecting?
I mean, back to what you were saying earlier about the like framing COP as a failure. That happened in the U.S. after the Black Lives Matter protests started to die down. Like, it's happening again. We're like, it kind of just ups and downs and nothing happens. But yeah, it's kind of that same pushback that Ash was giving. It's like, well, actually, there are lots of things happening. And like, and I feel like over the course of like comparing my perspectives on race to my parents' perspectives on race, yeah, there has been a huge shift, even though we're still just so far away, and people get really stuck on just that so far away portion, which like, yeah, I do have to hang out there, but it's not everything.
That's very true. And that's just the recent history over maybe the last 20 years of
Definitely.
whether it's protests or researchers or other parts of society trying to change society for the better. There's so many things that you could point at as a failure, but then looking back, it changed so many things on how all sorts of things work in society. But we're going to let you in, Ash, as well on all of this.
Yeah, I just had a bit of an internet wobble, but I think I'm back. And just from what Lillian was saying then, and then I'll come back to Isaac's paper a little bit. So I think that it's the idea that we define success as if this amazing top-level policy has come through or not. Whereas in fact, the change in culture is what permeates society. I mean, maybe not, if you were to think about the LGBTQ movement and how that progressed. I mean, after the Second World War, Alan Turing, who made the computer, which was a massive part in ending the war, he was arrested for being gay. Then, it was only a few years ago that gay marriage became legal, but attitudes towards gay people shifted way before the actual law came in. The law didn't come in and then everybody started accepting gay people. Gay people were very accepted, there was still obviously pockets of homophobia and things like that, but the general society moves much faster than the political document that comes from the top down. And I think you can see that same thing with climate change. Like, I bumped into Kevin Anderson earlier today, and he was saying that we don't even know what leverage points there might be, which will flip how we move. That if you would have said 5 years ago, so a 15-year-old girl is going to go and protest in Sweden and it's going to change loads, you'd be like, what are you talking about? No, it isn't even on our agenda. That COVID came along 2 years ago and flipped the way we work. And I mean, maybe, long term, the amount of people working from home, this reduction in flying all around the world to have business meetings, it's not the solution, but it's part of it. And I think that you can't know yet what are the big societal changes, such as COVID, will just come along and flip the whole thing on its head. And then also, by defining it as success or failure based on a top-down policy as opposed to a bottom-up culture, doesn't take into account how change happens. And that, change happens from people pressuring government for long enough, and then the government changes. But the people aren't waiting for the government. I think that's a thing we're seeing as well, that, I mean, the private sector spans from Shell to that little organic shop down the road. So, there's so many different actors within when we say the private sector. But there are certain elements of it that aren't waiting for government anymore. They've still not managed to implement proper carbon pricing, and companies are starting to do that themselves. And I think that it's about, do we have to wait for the government policies to come in, or can we act before then? And the government, in this case, national, local, is often the slowest moving part. And when it gets closer to regional, to municipality level, the state works faster. The state is more ambitious when at a smaller scale than at a bigger scale, because it's scared of failure. I think maybe that's an issue with our culture, that fear of failure prevents people from being ambitious in certain ways, particularly on a large political scale. And then just coming back to Isaac's paper as well, and how you said that, you only measured carbon. And I think it's interesting. So, I mean, we got an understanding of ozone and a hole in the ozone in the 80s, 90s, and then that was acted on to stop it. And that was, it's quite a concrete solution, that we have this hole in the ozone and it's coming from these CFCs, and we need to stop using them. And it was quite a linear kind of method of thinking. With climate change, obviously, it's much more complex. But also, I think there are so many things that we've known about climate change, or CO2 as a warming gas, since the late 1800s. It was 1893 or something like that, that initial paper came out. Things like biodiversity loss, plastic pollution, we don't really understand the complexity of it as much. I think we have a better understanding of the complexities of climate change than we do of biodiversity loss. Certainly of plastic, like in the last few years, you've seen research about the amount of plastic that humans have built up in their bodies, the bioaccumulation of plastics, toxic heavy metals. Now we know that those bioaccumulations are there. We don't know how it affects us. And I think that maybe in 50 or 100 years time, while climate change is now the biggest global threat, I think give it another decade or century of research, that it will just be one of many. When you look at all of the planetary boundaries and how we're overstepping biodiversity, we're overstepping plastic pollutions and novel entities, there's so many bits that we're overstepping that climate is just the first step in what will be many existential crises that have been caused by humanity's lack of ability to see themselves in harmony with nature and then not live within the boundaries of it.
I'm actually very interested in how it goes in the conference about the carbon pricing. It's been in the news, this Article 6 from the Paris Protocol, that there are three mechanisms, two market mechanisms on trading emission rights in carbon dioxide, and also one kind of states north subsidizing the south. Have you heard anything about this Article 6? If they have come closer to kind of an agreement, or is it no agreement?
So I know it's still being negotiated. I saw the Youngo youth kind of paper towards the negotiators. And it was for things which, I mean, I've never seen the legal part of the negotiations in this way, but it's things like the word human rights ends up being in brackets. And you're like, no, human rights shouldn't be in brackets. Human rights should be in bold. It's not a bracket situation. It's life or death. It's access to water. It's access to clean air. And I think it's still a sticking point, but the unfortunate point is it's, when you look at how many fossil fuel lobbyists there are, and that they're getting into those negotiation rooms, and I feel like it's the global south negotiators are literally holding up there. And the speaker from the Pacific Islands yesterday spoke about holding the line, and that they're trying their best to keep human rights in there, to keep the specifics that you can't just it's I've not heard of it from in COP, but before then it's just a new form of colonialism, that we've extracted people, we have extracted natural resources, and now we're extracting this unit of carbon in a bizarre accounting method. I mean, on the flip side, I think that I've also sat and talked about the need to finance, particularly for forestry and nature-based solutions, that we need to finance the preservation of those things, to make sure that farmers who are living on the ground, if they can't deforest an extra bit of land to increase their agricultural yield because their family's starving, we need to find better solutions for those people to get food, for those people to get income. And that can come with carbon markets and financing. But then there's equal ideas that, I think when you have the massive companies like Shell that say, oh, well, we're going to reforest an area the size of Spain. Like, okay, well, the size of Spain isn't just knocking around going free. You can't just reforest an area the size of a nation and no one's affected by it. And I think because there's so many complexities to it, and I think that this will be the final sticking point of when I was, what do we expect to come of these negotiations? Like, is this an issue that has so many contested stakeholders and standpoints and points of view that we will never find a consensus, as long as one side sticks to growth and economics and GDP and colonialism, and the other side is sticking to human rights and environmental justice? I don't know where they will find consensus in that, especially with the given power imbalance. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it's a very good reflection, because I'm thinking a lot about it and reading these reports, also from the GFAM said this pre-group for COP26 on kind of trying to unite finance to invest in more green, the green transition. And my understanding is that there's going to be a lot of money going to what is called green transitions. and there are still problems with taxonomy on what is a green kind of transition. And the asset, one of the bigger asset managers, they did a research, and they show that the capitalization costs will be lowered for these companies that has a taxonomy on being green. So that is rather clear that the cost for these companies will be lower, and it will be more interesting to invest in them, and it will be a lot of liquidity that goes to these companies. What they are asking for, this is interesting, that they want regulators to step up and to make clear what is a green taxonomy. So of course they have a self-interest, because they would put a lot of their money in what is called the green economy. So they want to have clear kind of rules for the investments. But I think it's like it opens up for regulators actually to take to be more tough on the taxonomy, because the money will flow there. So have there been any talks about this kind of shifting from private standard setting to more tough kind of state intrastate regulations on the taxonomy? So the money that comes there will actually change it to green transition. So it's will not just be this green washing. Have you picked up anything on that?
I think on that, so there's not from the negotiation side. I was attending an event yesterday with a speaker from Nigeria, so it was about Africa's relation to the NDCs and to mitigation. And he made a really important statement, and then he was talking about in the global north, you talk about an energy transition, and in Africa, we're talking about energy access. And that because of that, it's not it's not the same question, so it can't be the same answer. And then there's also, I mean, that when we talk about energy.
Now we lost you, Ash.
Green, more electric vehicles on the road. Oh no.
Now you're back. So
am I back?
You're back. Please continue.
Yeah, so within the systems of financing green technology, I think it's incredibly problematic that we have to move away from fossil fuels, but then also these greener technologies just displace the problem elsewhere. It's not about CO2 anymore. It's about land and water degradation, where you're going to dig up lithium. And I think it's another, I mean, I don't like the use of the word false solutions. I think it makes things too binary. And I've seen a lot of like activist groups talk about the pushing of false solutions within COP, and that includes renewable energies. It includes carbon pricing or carbon offsets. I think calling them a false solution makes it binary when it's not binary. The jury's now, it's not black and white, and you can't assess it that rigorously to make it a scientific explanation that way. There's many pros and cons. But I can see maybe not, because now our immediate focus at COP is on CO2 and climate just in that way. But like I was saying, that maybe in the future we'll have these issues with the same issues we have now, but for biodiversity or for plastics, that give it another 10 years when the renewable energy infrastructure has expanded greatly. And you've got people of Chile and Peru, where they had lithium mines, suddenly living in completely degraded lands. It's just a sort of transfer of the problem, because it's still always within the same extractive system. For the financing, I don't know exactly where the money's going. I know there's been issues between, so the 100 billion that they talk about financing from states is all for I don't know. I was thinking it's all for mitigation or all for adaptation, but I've just forgotten which way it is, so I don't take me on this anymore. Yeah, I hope that the bit that I was certain on could give you some answer to your question.
Thank you very much.
And we lost you for half a second, so that was fine. We have to wrap up. This is intense, short but sweet. Is there any like 2-sentence summary or something you want to send us off with? I have a 3-sentence thing, and then maybe we can include this 2-minute video at the end as well.
Do you want to go first? Because I mean, I'm guessing you've already pre-planned your 3 sentences. You've just dropped me with 3 sentences. There's a lot of pressure.
Not really. It was a story that appeared, but maybe you can go first, and then I can have my
Okay.
storytelling 3 sentences.
I think I'll take mine from a really good quote that I heard from an indigenous pastoralist farmer from Kenya, who said, "The youth can run fast, but the elders know the road." And I think that from this, it's incredibly important at this COP to utilize the energy that's had within the youth and get them systems, get them access to the systems where they need to be, because the people who have the energy and the passion to make the change are excluded from the table. And then a final sentence that I heard yesterday as well, that those who have resources lack solutions, and those who have solutions lack resources. And I think that that's never been made more clear to me than walking around the halls of COP26. So we've got to change that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And my is very short. I try to be short story. Back in 2009 at the Copenhagen meeting, we too, Isak and I, worked on education. And that's educational coordinators and director of cities. So it was a very intense semester. I can't remember anything else that happened that semester, but it was like the end point at Christmas. So my partner already left. I was home alone, and you were traveling up to the US, I think. So you came by and said goodbye. And then I was alone and watching these COP meetings from Copenhagen that they live streamed in the big room overnight. Which was kind of like I should have gone to bed, but it was a really intriguing thing with, like, you talked about holding the line, how this representative that's still there at the COP26 now, guy from some of these arguing how this trade-off that they tried to do in Copenhagen was not going to make it for them. And the Copenhagen meeting very much failed in a sense, and it was a lost couple of years up until Paris. But it was very clear also from that this is very much a long game and a long fight. That it doesn't really end, and what is a failure then has to be turned into something else along the way. And what we can do here might be more accessible than something that happens on an international level as well. So thank you so much, everybody attending today, and everybody that came through these 2 weeks. And thank you so much, Ash. And we'll connect again when you're back in Sweden again.